What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to another episode of 2016 E3 coverage. It's going to be Sony right now. First thing they did, they just jumped right into it, so I'm going to. They showed God of War. Now, God of War, they had sucked down the camera a little bit to show this title, and it's much more of a Tomb Raider style where you're that close versus sort of zoomed out. And as anybody knows who animates anything, you sort of have to look at different things to sort of get that to look realistic and look good. There was some crunchiness there. There were some problems in the animation. But as an entire picture, it looked fantastic. A lot of animation, a lot of deformation in different creatures' faces, particle effects everywhere. It was just like a shower of God particles in most of that game. Really cool. Lots of effects. Sadly, we then found out afterwards that you're talking more like late 2017, if not completely for sure 2018. That was Jeff Keighley talking to the developer at the end on YouTube Gaming. He basically tried to get a sort of a date, and it really sounded like 2018, which is sort of sad, but I think expected. It looked amazing. It's got a kid in it. I don't know if that's Kratos' son or an adopted kid. There's many years between the last game and this one because this is not a remake. This is a sequel. So what they showed looked really good. You were up close. You were in battle, face to face with creatures, far closer than we've seen. In fact, I'm going to be brutally honest. In many ways, it reminded me of Rise for the Xbox One. Very, very close to Rise. And so there's going to be some comparisons there. But what I saw looked a little rough, but it looked a little rough in the way that a game in 2018 is going to look in 2016. And then they went on and they basically talked about Days Gone. Now, Days Gone looks a little bit like, I guess, The Last of Us and Sons of Anarchy. Motorbike club, I would assume the vice president of a motorbike club, maybe the president of a motorbike club after an apocalypse of some kind with like different ghoul creatures chasing him, sort of a zombie game. The trailer didn't really interest me. It showed some people driving around. It was him talking, and I remember the day that the world ended, that kind of thing. But it still holds a lot of promise. And the overall world itself, you can tell Sony's aiming this for the typical, The Last of Us, Uncharted 4 fans. Maybe not Uncharted 4 because it's a little bit darker than that, but you can totally tell that that's what they're aiming for. And I liked what I saw there, but a long ways out. And then they talked about The Last Guardian. Well, they didn't. They just basically put out a trailer. And I think you can see the genesis in a different hardware now in The Last Guardian. You can really see that original genesis on the PS3 of The Last Guardian moving into the PS4. It just doesn't hold up. It looks good in a fantastic thematic way, almost like the Labyrinth looked good, but you could still tell they were puppets. But there's a fantasy aspect to them. There's a gossamer feeling about them. I really like that about Last Guardian. But graphically, it was definitely, there was issues almost everywhere. It still looks good, but it's like there's issues with shadowing and dithering and all this kind of stuff. It just shows its age is all. No diss on that game. It just shows its age. It's been in development hell, and that kind of stuff happens. October, it's releasing this year. I can't wait because it needs to just come out. It needs to come out, get in people's hands, let them play it, even if it's a flawed title, let them move forward. Shadow of the Colossus had a terrible frame rate a lot of times on the PS2. It was still very enjoyable to many, many people. Get that thing out there in people's hands, let them play it, and let's move on. And then they showed Horizon Zero Dawn, which it's easily one of my games of the show, or games of the Sony conference. Horizon Zero Dawn just looks fantastic. The amount of animation that they have in the main character is absolutely something to behold. It's not the primary animations or the secondary animations. It's like the tertiary animations. It's the animations, the little belt buckles and how they flip and fold when she moves. It's how when an explosion goes off and she rolls, there's a crumple that happens. A human doesn't roll as a perfect fucking ball, because guess what? We're not perfect fucking balls. Well, but when you roll, there's an actual hump when a person actually rolls at first, when their shoulders sort of bunch in. And she does that even. It's phenomenal looking. Gets up. But the best part was the collision detection. She grabs, wrestles, whatever, knocks down this creature. And when she does so, the collision detection is almost ungodly. I mean, it looks fantastic. And there's all these different, almost like, I don't even know how to describe it, the robotic, organic feel of everything and the corded muscle that's actually corded steel and fiber. And you see that with her, even her hair that's sort of like in the curls or in the, strings. I don't know what you want to call it. There was even some of that where there was this cool intermixing of the different organics with her and that creature when she tackled it. There was some awesome stuff going on. There's a really a high amount of art direction in that title. All the creatures looked amazing. The world looked amazing. The world was huge. They zoomed out and they showed you a little spot of where you were. Looks like it's going to be a fantastic game graphically. It's got it nailed. Gameplay, it looks good. Of course, we won't know. They showed a boss battle in that was in no way, shape, or form impressive. That was actually sad. They should have showed just normal gameplay where they ran around and like freaking collected rose petals. I would have enjoyed that more. But what they showed of the game before that happened, phenomenal. It's obviously going to be super high on my target to make sure I get to and get to review. And then Detroit Become Human. So this was pretty cool. It's a David Cage game, which surprises me that I even think it looks cool. But it's, from all intents and purposes, you're a negotiator that's an android. And it starts out with you basically going upstairs to the top of this building where another android has a girl held, and he's either going to kill her or throw her off the side of the building, and you get to sort of try to stop that. And if you don't, you get to sort of go back in time. Now, I'm actually wondering if what's really going on is if you're living in that one moment of action, like in that electric synapse inside that android's brain, as androids think and can do calculations a billion times our speed in 1/4 of a second. I'm wondering if, and David Cage has talked about certain books he's liked that sort of mimic this overall narrative theme. I'm wondering if you're in that last little moment where that action occurs or something. I'm not quite sure, because you show back up and do it again, like a Groundhog's Day. And in many ways, a little bit like Bethesda's Prey game, where there was a little moment of like, hey, there's a repetition there. But you're not quite sure what the repetition is. There's also some cool Batman-style detective stuff that goes on where like you touch your hand to some blood and stuff like that, and there's all these different readouts of what's going on. You know, it's typical David Cage game, where by the time we're done, we probably won't know at all what was even going on, but in the end, it might be fun to play. And then they talked about VR. Resident Evil 7 was the first thing they showed. Now, this is sort of where a lot of people that were watching it got a little confused, because some of these games aren't VR at all, but the way they were announcing them made you think that they were either exclusive VR, or just for Sony, and they weren't. But the first one, for example, is Resident Evil 7. It's not exclusive. It's on all the systems. It's exclusive, of course, to VR right now on consoles, which is the PSVR. That looked pretty good. It was a little rough. It was, it's a Resident Evil game, so you're walking around, you're doing different things, you're basically getting chased by bad guys, that kind of stuff. It wasn't any great shakes, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in VR. As somebody who's played horror games in VR, they work fairly well. Unfortunately, the console has the same problem that the HTC Vive has and that the Rift has with movement and getting ill. And I don't see anything that they showed that looks like they've magically fixed that. And that always hurts a little bit, because one of the greatest parts about horror games is that running away and hiding, and it's difficult to do when you're teleporting. So trust me, I know, because I played a bunch of these games where you have to do that. And then they talked about Farpoint. Now, Farpoint looked really rough. Farpoint looks to be a little bit like the movie The Martian, except with 2 people and an alien menace on the planet. So maybe nothing like The Martian. Now, really, it is just a space game. It looks like you're on an alien planet. You're with another person. You got a gun. You can do some shooting. All that stuff looked interesting, but not 100% sure exactly what was occurring there. And then it jumped to Star Wars Battlefront Xwing mission. Now, that was cool, except I can't figure out what they're saying. I can't figure out if this is PSVR only, or if it's Rift and HTC as well, or if it's some scattering and mixing in between. But basically, they showed the person with the ability to look around inside the Xwing. Looked really cool, very exciting to see how that'll turn out. I think that of all the things that VR does well on the consoles, that'll be what it does well. Racing games inside of an X-Wing, those kind of things. The moment you start moving around as a person, that's when you have issues. So I'm excited to see what that does in Star Wars. I'm not 100% sure it's going to look as good as the original Star Wars game. That's going to be hard anyway, as good as Star Wars Battlefront looks on a TV on a PS4. But it'll look good on the VR. It'll look good. Nice bright light on that. A nice, all of the overall levels are bright in that game, and I think that helps. And then they showed Batman Arkham VR, which I have no clue what it is. They had Mark Hamill talking, and then they showed the Batman's mask, and they were like, Batman Arkham VR. VR missions could be walking around Arkham, and that's it. I don't know if I'd want to play as Batman right now in any of the headsets. I'm just being brutally honest, man. I mean, that's just a Ralph factory just waiting to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I have a feeling what it is really that. It's basically probably exploring Arkham, maybe doing particular things in Arkham, maybe even taking down bad guys, but not a lot of, repelling and stuff like that, because holy crap, people are going to get sick. And then they showed Final Fantasy 15. So this, think of what you want of Final Fantasy. I think that VR really does its best when it's adding to the cockpit experience, and it's adding to experiences that it can really work well in. What they showed in the VR, the Final Fantasy 15 VR experience was more of a, hey, look, we've got Final Fantasy 15. Hey, look, we're going to put VR in it. It was the least, I think, impressive of everything I saw for VR in Sony's press conference, and I was actually sort of just disappointed that it was even there. It didn't do a good job for VR either. The gun shooting looked sort of poor. Everything about it just didn't look as good as it could have, and I want VR to succeed, so I would have liked for that to have probably not been there. And then one of the funny things was Call of Duty was being shown. Call of Duty was being shown, and it was crazy because a lot of people thought it was some space game involving VR, and then all of a sudden they're like Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and people are like, wait, what? What the fuck? That's Call of Duty? Because these are the same people who were in the same thread were like, I hate Call of Duty, man. Thank God it's not a Call of Duty, and it was actually Infinite Warfare. That was funny. So that looked good. You know, Infinite Warfare, they just wanted to show it on the PlayStation stage, and that was fun to see. And then they did Lego. They covered some of that. That'll look cool. They've got some additions for Crash and stuff. Crash Bandicoot, right? Skylanders. Sorry, they showed Skylanders as well, and they showed that the Crash will be in that. And then Kojima had a game called Death Stranding with Norman Reedus as the main actor. Basically, all it showed was Norman Reedus on a beach, stands up, he's holding a baby, it looks amazing. There's a bunch of dead creatures on the beach. He looks up, and there's 5 silhouettes of people floating in the air. It's like Death Stranding, and that's it. So it said in-game engine. Well, what we found out right after the event is actually that's in a game engine, and they're not using that engine. This was done in a game engine just to show something for Sony at the press conference, which was really disturbing because then once they started talking about the timing, you are looking at 2018 if we're lucky. So that was sort of sad because I was like, man, this game looks like it's going to be messed up. I mean, it looked crazy, and then they were like, yeah, that's actually not at all. That's not the engine we're using, so it'll all have to be redone. They haven't even chosen an engine yet, so it's going to be forever. And the last couple ones, Insomniac Spider-Man, easily my game of Sony's show. Insomniac Spider-Man. Insomniac has the chops to make a good Spider-Man game. I think we've seen that with the Sun's game and a couple other things that they've made. Second Son, they are just really good at that, and I cannot wait. I don't know which of the 55 Superman or Spider-Mans it is, and I'm not even a big fan of Spider-Man as a hero, but I've played a lot of bad Spider-Man games, and it's time for a good one, right? It's time for a good one. Let's play a good one. That looked good, and I trust Insomniac for the most part. They've had a couple misses, but I trust them to get it out and do a good job. And then there was also Crash Remastered, which pissed off a ton of people, but basically a lot of people assumed there would be a remake of Crash, and instead 1, 2, and 3 will be remastered. I think it's probably too soon to complain, because we don't know what a remaster will be. You certainly aren't going to remaster the first Crash Bandicoot to the PS4 without a ton of changes. So I have a feeling it'll be sort of a remasteration. It'll be a mix of the remaster, reimagining, and remaking. So it'll be a mix of all those. And then lastly, once again at the very end, they showed Days Gone again, and had that gameplay and had that played out. And they showed a couple games in between and stuff like that. Nothing really surprising. When it comes to the review itself of their conference, I would say it's easily an A. They have the best conference so far. A minus maybe. One of the issues I have is if I had not known some of these issues that came up afterwards, like the fact that it looks like the Reedus game is going to be out by 2018. God of War is way out. If I had known that, who knows? But it's just one of those things where it's unfortunate that we get excited about these games and find out they're so far out because there's people who've actually done sort of statistics, and Sony, especially Sony's last E3, like only 20% of those games have been released or something like that. And some of the other companies are a little bit better at saying, hey, here's something, boom, it's released. I do understand that we'll get it done when we get it done, but there's a lot of Last Guardians here, floating around where things can wait for a long time, where I think we're seeing a PS4 to PS4.5 situation going on a couple games that a lot of us are really looking forward to. I think that it's probably the same thing with the Scorpio and the Xbox, but since Microsoft has a tendency to say stuff sooner and get it out sooner, we see some of these games on the PS4 just sort of in limbo. And that's probably just Last Guardian speaking for me, to be brutally honest. Like, I don't even care about the game anymore. I just want it out, you know, so I can finally play it. So yeah, an A. They had really good games. It wasn't by any means like the best I've ever seen, but it was for these events where Microsoft showed some good games and obviously nailed it on the hardware front. I didn't feel that they had, the Guerrilla games. I mean, when you look at Horizon, probably just, I mean, there was something about Horizon that when you see it, you're just like, damn, son, that looks awesome. I mean, that is just, it doesn't matter who you show that game to, they're going to look at it and go, fuck. And I don't even actually think there's a lot of games I've ever seen that would make people do that. Not even an Uncharted. Yeah, I know people are going to be pissed. Uncharted, I think, has a subtle beauty to it that isn't even close to as in your face as Horizon Zero Dawn. I think that game's beauty is right there, right? You can't escape it. It is right in front of your face, whether it be animation, flora, fauna, it doesn't matter. It is it's a sight to behold. So anyway, as a fan of all consoles and an owner of all consoles and an owner of a PC as well, I can tell you right now, this was a good E3 regardless for these two major companies, and it'll be interesting to see if we hear anything from Nintendo that's even useful this entire event. But anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked it. I'm sure I missed a couple things in all of the conferences. That's absolutely for sure going to happen. I'm just one person doing this on my own. But I appreciate you guys watching. If you liked them, thumbs up. If you disliked it, thumbs down. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.